I'm Rolene Marks. Welcome to Modiin and Beyond. Join me every Sunday between 3 and 4 on Radio Modiin as we take a look at what's happening in Modiin, Israel, and beyond. Good morning, actually a belated good morning, and apologies to everybody tuning in at 10 o'clock and following the absolute wild shenanigans that was trying to get Modiin and Beyond up and running this morning. But it's very suspicious to me, to my engineer, and to my first guest this morning when all of a sudden we have a big technical issues. So welcome to it. I'm Rolene Marks. We have a world exclusive on this morning's Modiin and Beyond. We are going to be speaking to the Mossad agent who wasn't. What is that all about? You want to know? Well, grab a coffee or even a whiskey because, hey, you might need it when you hear this story. We're going to be chatting to her. And then we're going to be chatting a little later to our queen of all things entertainment, Yael Kinar. But first up, now, we have spoken a lot about Iran on the show. We have spoken about the threat that Iran poses to the state of Israel. We've spoken about the protests in Iran, the situation for women as they so bravely stand up to the regime. But never before have we featured a guest who has had access to the highest echelons of the Iranian regime. I am so proud to introduce my guest, and try as they might, nobody can keep us separated. I am so delighted to be joined by Catherine Perez Shakdam, telling her story on radio for the first time. Let me read to you her bio. Catherine Perez Shakdam is a French Jewish political analyst and commentator for the Middle East, a former consultant for the United Nations Security Council on Yemen's war economy. Her research was instrumental in better understanding Yemen's political landscape and actors' financial interests. Her writing and commentaries on the Middle East have graced the cover of countless publications, including the Huffington Post, BBC Arabic, BBC Persia, Voices of America, and the Times of Israel. In 2017, Catherine was the only Western media personality to have been granted an interview with the now President Ibrahim Raisi. I am so honored and so delighted to introduce my friend, Catherine Perez Shakdam. You can read her article. It's on layoftheland.online. Catherine, they've tried to keep us apart, but we finally got you. Welcome to Modiin and Beyond.
Thank you so much. Yes, they did. Like I said, they can try to slow us down, but they can't stop us. So thank you so much for the introduction, by the way.
They can't stop us. Now, your story is absolutely unbelievably it's incredible. I mean, I read your story. It was like watching a Bond movie, and yet it starts with a wedding. So tell us how your story starts, how you met your husband, and where we go from here.
Well, it was a very simple story, I would say. It's, everyone else's story. I went to London to pursue my studies. And I met the man who was going to become my husband at uni. We got married rather quickly. And then, from then on, we had a son. And then we moved to Yemen twice. So the first time, we went there, we stayed for about a year or two, just maybe shy of 2 years. Didn't like it initially, came back to the UK. And then we decided to give it another go a few years later. And this is when really my whole journey I would say that would eventually lead me to Iran kind of started. Because when I was in Yemen, my arrival in Yemen coincided with, the rise of the Arab Spring and everything that, kind of happened after that, Egypt, Syria, Yemen, obviously. And I was there, I witnessed it all. And what was interesting to me is that by being, in Yemen, living with Yemenis and seeing exactly how the whole political landscape was really unfolding, because I could see and I could feel, the Iranian influence and the way that sectarianism was rising, the way that Yemen had been broken into truly. And I knew some of the actors that were actually doing the breaking into.
Now you married.
So that was very interesting too.
You married,
yes.
You married into quite an influential family. This is a family with ties to the Iranian regime. You've described what it's like to live in Yemen at the time of the Arab Spring, the uprising against the current leadership in various countries. What is it like for a Jewish woman married to a Yemenite man whose family is influential and connected to members of the Iranian regime? What is it like for you to live in Yemen at this time?
It wasn't fun. I can tell you that much. Now, look, my ex-husband's family was connected to the Iranian regime, but they didn't know that they were. This was very interesting to me because, like I said, and I explained in the article that I've written for ACLS and that you republished, the certain elements of the Iranian regime had been planted in Yemen, and this is the modus operandi that they actually follow time and time again, where they put particular people, agents who are actually indigenous from the land. So this particular individual, Hassan al-Ahmad, was Yemeni, and he was there. So obviously, being born in Yemen, having been raised in Yemen, he developed friendships with various people. I think he made a point at being in the right rooms, I would say, and having the right connections within Yemen. He wasn't hiding the fact that he was a Shia Muslim, but no one knew at the time. And it took me quite a few years to understand that he was actually connected to the regime. And he was operating, with this. So he had his identity, his Yemeni identity, moving and developing friendships, in various, I would say, sector of Yemen, political sector. He was linked to very powerful businessmen. And I think that my ex-husband at the time was basically just yet another platform that he could use to kind of infiltrate further into the regime. And I became useful to him in the sense that he felt, number one, that he could mold me, because I was very curious and I wanted to learn, and I had picked up on the fact that Iran was at the heart of everything that was unfolding in Yemen, that there was this, I would say, power in the shadow, kind of, moving strings and pulling certain levers, and things were happening, and I could see it. And I wanted to understand, and so I kind of played along. But to go back to my experience of, being a Jewish woman in Yemen, it wasn't fun. I suffered, and I don't want to play the victim because I'm not a victim. I suffered anti-Semitism, I think, in a way that was so systematic that it almost got me. It almost really destroyed me. It's a constant berating. It's a constant belittling, attempt to erase what you are, who you are, making you ashamed of what you are and where you come from and your traditions and everything that makes you you. And I think there's something very particular about anti-Semitism in that it attacks a person in its very soul and its very core. It's not just a criticism of, someone's skin like you experience in racism or in the country where you come from that, some people might have an objection to. It's really a case of someone trying to erase everything that makes you as a human being, as a person, as an individual. And it's very nefarious. It's very insidious because it's slow. It's a slow burn. And in the end, what happened is, and what happened with me, is that you become the instrument of your own anti-Semitism, in the sense that you hate yourself so much that you become, you try to destroy yourself. So it becomes a case of self-harm almost, where you're trying to erase who you are, you're trying to adopt other people's customs, going literally against your own soul and trying to remodel you onto something else. And you can't, because I think that Judaism is something that is so visceral in that it's in our DNA, literally. It's impossible to do. You can't change your skin. And I tried, it almost broke me. And I guess that's something, I think one day I got really mad. I was pushed so far up against the wall, and I talked about it a little bit. I think something literally awakened in me, and I was like, I can't do it anymore. And I decided to fight back. And that was really, for me, the biggest.
Because let's speak about this. This is the Iranian regime that we are speaking about, the powerhouse behind massive threats to Israel, existential threats to Israel, real physical threats to Israel. This is a regime that routinely denies the Holocaust, calls for the eradication of the state of Israel, and is the largest state sponsor of terror organizations in the world. We've got them right on our doorstep. Hamas in the Gaza Strip, other terror entities, Hezbollah, another proxy in the north. We are very much surrounded by the Iranian influence. We know what the Iranians' end game is to create the caliphate. But here you are, a Jewish woman, a vulnerable Jewish woman, because as you say, the anti-Semitism almost eats you alive. This slow burn that makes you hate yourself. Now you start getting involved in moving through the channels that take you to the highest offices in the world. You'll become the only Westerner to have interviewed Raisi, and you will eventually meet. And when I read this, I had to like, put the paper down and look back again. You meet the Ayatollah Al Khamenei, the man responsible for saying Israel is a cancer that we need to eradicate. Let's start moving with you on your journey. How do you infiltrate, and how do you move through those channels?
Okay, so the first thing that I would say, and it's important because people, have asked me, how in the world did a woman, a Jew, get into Iran? How come? And the very reason why they didn't was actually anti-Semitism, in the sense that my ex-husband's family wasn't particularly keen on screaming my identity to everyone, because there was a lot of shame attached to it. So even though they knew, as far as the world was concerned, I was just, a French girl, and I had married their son. Exactly, people assumed that I was French, therefore that I was Christian, and never ever thought, Judaism did not come into play. They never thought that I could be that. So I think it served me as a massive cover, in the sense that I adopted my husband as far as the outside world was concerned, which happens very often, Islamic world, where women becomes almost, a commodity, the property of her husband, an extension of identity. And on that basis, when I started, writing about what I was seeing in the Middle East during the Arab Spring, being very critical of Saudi Arabia in its, war crimes against Yemen, and what I consider to be human rights violation, my criticism of U.S. interventionism in Iraq, and I wasn't defending Saddam Hussein because I thought that he had to go. I was criticizing the manner in which America intervened in Iraq, because I felt that there was no plan to rebuild the country, to actually bring democracy to the country, and that actually what they had done was a crime against the Iraqis, because about 1 million people lost their lives in the process of this interventionism, and I was very critical of this. And I believe that caught the attention of the Iranian regime, in the sense that they live in such a binary world, where if you are critical of Saudi Arabia, which represents for them, the epitome of Sunni power, then you must be someone that could either support the Iranian regime, or someone who already supports the Iranian regime but hasn't formulated yet. And so they felt that they could reach out to me and try me out, which they did. And I was initially approached by a TV channel that back then was owned by Hezbollah. It has now, been debunked. I think they had funding problem, which is a theme, in Iranian-backed, I would say, networks. Money doesn't always come in the right way, or money is being, embezzled, or they have administrative issues. But anyway, so I was approached by them, and they asked me on to, to do commentary on Yemen, because this is what I knew. This is what I was talking about, essentially. And then slowly, over the years, there's this whole network that I was introduced to, where people are basically passing you on from one network to the other, one radio station to the other, one media outlet to another, where you're going to be invited to write on various issues. And depending on how you respond and the arguments that you put forward, the Iranian regime will vet you, will decide whether or not you're actually worth an investment. And by then I had caught on, because I knew what ATJ was. I knew that I was talking to certain Lebanese personalities who were very close to Hezbollah. I understood the language. I had picked up upon the, I would say, what I call the regimers' language. They have this narrative and rhetoric that they follow to a T. And if you pay attention, you will notice they all speak the same way. The way that they formulate their arguments are always the same. The way that they attack people is also always the same. And so I picked up on who they were. I knew that they were part of the regime. I knew that they were, around Iran. And so I played the game. And it took me, give or take 10 years, to get to where I wanted to go. And initially, I didn't know where I was going to go. All I knew is that I knew who the enemy was. I knew that someone had to get closer, that someone had to go onto the other side and understand what was being said behind closed doors. Because obviously, there's always a language that the regime uses in public. They always hide, behind certain words. They always deny certain things. And I knew that there was an agenda, because I could see the way that people were talking, in Yemen, when they were, they had, I would say, private meetings and things like this, family gatherings, friends being together and talking about Israel, talking about the Jews, talking about the agenda for the Middle East, talking about the ways that they wanted to destroy Western democracy, how they wanted to break into Western capitals and destroy it from within and force the West to adopt and acquiesce to their model of governance. And so I just decided to take it upon myself to do it. And not because I felt that I was special. It was really just anger. I wanted to face those who wanted me and everyone else gone. I wanted to see if not maybe, because I knew that we were missing the mark. I knew that there was a lot of misunderstanding, that we were not understanding and appreciating the level of indoctrination and radicalization and how far they were willing to go to fight us. And when I say us, I'm not just talking about the Jewish community or even Israel. I'm talking about any person wanting to live free and think, itself free. That's what they're after. They want to save people.
Catherine, are we missing anything as the West? You're speaking here about a certain style of language, a certain way of indoctrination. And, we hear Western leaders, and of course, we're not privy to what goes on behind closed doors, speaking that they're very aware of the threat that Iran poses with their nuclear program. But is there something specific that you feel that we as Westerners or Western leaders are missing when it comes to Iran and their carefully designed messaging?
Absolutely. And the worst part is that they've been telling for over a decade what is it that they want to do. When I gives his speech and he talks about the ways that the apostate, he wants to fight, the great Satan, the great devil, America, how he wants to destroy Israel. And it's in the slogan of the regime, death to Israel, death to America. He means it. And I think that we have missed the mark where we believe that the regime in Iran wants to exist within its borders. This is not the case. Everything tells you that there's an expansionist agenda. Everything tells you that when they conquer another land, they don't necessarily do it by sending boots on the ground. It's an ideological takeover. And what they want is to destroy. If you look at Lebanon, you look at Iraq, you look at Yemen, you look at Syria, every single country that the regime has taken over, essentially, has been destroyed. Economy is in tatters, social makeup has been broken up, sectarianism is on the rise. And the reason why they do this is that it's a nihilistic power, it's a nihilistic ideology that is based on the notion, and I would say the pursuit of martyrdom. they want, a very particular elite wants to rule by employing fear, by employing indoctrination, by weaponizing terror. And when I say weaponization of terror, I'm talking about the fact that everything that you become, everything that you are, is going up, it's going against your humanity. It's the negation of what makes us us. And even though human beings are inherently violent, because we have been at war since the beginning of time, we still aspire for better, for peace, and we aspire for, a world that our children could live in that is better than the one that we were born into. And the regime negates this. It doesn't aspire for anything else but death and destruction, because they think and they believe that this is the way to their way to control you, to rule over you. And you can see it. We've missed the mark in the way that the regime has expanded and sent agents across our Western capitals, the way that it's trying to manipulate our democratic institutions and turn them against us. You can see the way that they're trying to weaponize free speech, the way that they're forcing country to actually negate their right to free speech. You can see it in the many ways that they're pitting communities against one another by exploiting people upset or disenfranchisement and trying to basically put us in a situation of perpetual conflict with one another. And this is something that has happened across the West. You can see that we have a crisis. And also, I think the biggest thing for me has been the fact that the West has abandoned Israel. Israel is not only just a strategic partner for America or the EU, the UK. It's also the only functioning and thriving democracy in the Middle East, and for that it needs to be protected. And Israel has been literally thrown to the wolves in the sense that people cannot understand, and I think that stems from a profound bias and prejudice against Jews, that Israel is in the front line of this ideological war against Iran. And that everything that Israel is facing right now, when it comes to terror, when it comes to radicalization of certain segments, communities, it is Iran's plan. It's something that will happen to all of us later down the line. That what you see today happening in Israel is what we will face tomorrow. And that on the basis of that, the West should literally rally around Israel and protect Israel and spend every resources that it has at its disposal to help Israel win that war. Because if we win on the front line, then we don't need to fight it later on. And this is something that America doesn't seem to grasp. It's something that the EU doesn't seem to grasp, or the UK, because time and time again, those governments, those capitals have abandoned Israel, and I would say even blame Israel for daring to self-defend. And this is not okay. This is, for me, the biggest failure of, not I would say our century, but our Western civilization. Because if we don't understand that, I'm worried that we're going to have to fight a war that we might. It's not like we won't win it. It's that we're going to lose so much doing so that it would be a loss for me. Because life is precious.
So when we talk about a clash of civilizations, this is exactly what the Iranian regime have in mind.
Yes, but it's I would say it's worse than that, because a civilization would imply that Iran is trying to build something. They're not trying to build something; they're trying to tear it down. So I think it's a war for survival of our civilization rather than a clash, because again, they're not trying to replace our civilization by another. Their civilization is non-existent. It's the negation of. That's what I'm trying to explain. It's a nihilistic power with a nihilistic agenda, and it's not even Islamic. It's a cult. It's a cult of the personality. It's a cult of death. It's this notion that martyrdom is a religious duty, that life doesn't matter, that only in death can one find freedom, which is insane. They literally took a faith and twisted it on its head so much that it became the negation of. It's a really strange way of thinking. It's a very warped way of looking onto the world. And again, I don't think that we appreciate And also, I think one of the biggest victory of the Iranian regime has been to convince the world that Islamic radicalism is essentially Sunni and not Shia, because this is the school of thought that they espoused. And they've done this because you know as well as I do that group from like Hamas, for example, identify as Sunni Muslim, but they are being funded by Iran. We know now that the Iranian regime has funded the Taliban, has funded Al Qaeda. We know that ISIS, has been funded also by the Iranian regime, and so you need to ask yourself the question as to why. Why would a Shia power want to promote a group or an organization that is essentially sectarian and actually advocates for the death of Shia Muslim? It makes no sense unless it's not so much the language that they're supporting, but rather exploiting a tool of terror to destroy, and for them to be hiding behind it, because no one would think of looking too far ahead, thinking, where is the money coming from? Is there someone else behind those people? Is there another agenda? And so they led us to believe that we were at war with Sunni Islam, at war with those, Sunni radicals, when really we were at war all along with the Iranian regime. And I think that we need to up.
Catherine, let's talk about Shiite Islam for a second, because you experienced something very rare. In fact, I don't think many females have experienced this, and that is meeting the Ayatollah al-Khamenei. What is that like? What is the process that you go through to meet the Ayatollah? And what was he like?
It's not an experience that I would like to repeat, if I'm completely honest with you. It was one of those moments where you usually have a out of body experience, because you're thinking, well, this can't be happening. It's very strange, and I would say people might think a little bit crazy to say those things, but it's truly facing evil face. And I mean, for me, he embodies evil, because he believes and he means everything that he says. So as far as the process is concerned, I don't know whether that's the usual process, because obviously that was my first and only time that I've met him. So I don't know whether or not that's what happens with other people. But I was invited to this Palestine conference that takes place, I think it's every 4 years or so. It was back in 2017. And on the side of the conference, I was asked by a group of people whom I know were RSGC, but they don't come out and tell you who they are. They invited me for a shisha, quite simply. So we were there, having.
Catherine, you still there?
26.
Okay, you still
there?
there?
I'm still here. Oh, sorry. Do you want me to?
No.
Where did?
No, we're good. You were having a shisha, as one does. And you
want me to
and you get to the point where you are now invited to meet the Ayatollah.
Yes. Well, it didn't happen like that, because they told me when we were sitting down, they've asked me if you could do anything, meet anybody, ask whatever it is, what would you do? What would you ask? Who would you want to meet? And I could feel that I was being put on the spot, and I knew enough of the tradition of Shia Muslims and Iranians that I was thinking I'm going to ask something that it could give me that would not arise suspicion, because you need to be careful with the regime not to ask many questions or to appear too eager to meet certain people, because they're very, very paranoid. And I knew I was walking on very thin ice. And so I told them that it would be wonderful if I could have a ring from Ayatollah Khamenei. And then they smiled and they told me, yes, obviously, yes, we could do that. That's not a problem. What about meeting him? And I stood there looking at them, thinking, why? Obviously, yes, but this is impossible. He's the man of the regime. Like, why would he want to meet with someone like me? And then they told me, just, don't worry about it. Just be ready. And if it happens, we'll tell you. And then I went back to the hotel. And I received a phone call telling me, be ready in half an hour, 15 minutes. I can't remember exactly. And so I did. And I was picked up by this car and taken to a compound. in Tehran. I was very careful not to look through the window. I was very careful to not look at people too much, because I was extremely nervous. Thinking that this is cutting it very, very close. I mean, can you imagine? I was literally at the very heart of the regime. You're surrounded by RSGC. It's not a fun place to be. If anyone was to ask any question, I wasn't quite sure that I would come out of it. And then there I was ushered into this building. That it was one of those big living room, type of meeting place that Iranians use a lot. And then, I got in there, and then within a few minutes, he was just there. There was a chair that was put into literally in the middle of the room. It was really strange because everybody was sitting on the floor. They put a chair, and then again, within minutes, he just showed up. And it was the second time that I was actually seeing him, because at the opening of the conference, he was there. He gave a speech. And it was insane. He was just there in front of me. And, they told me, before that, they had told me what the protocol was in terms of, don't look at him in the eye, don't fidget, just sit down, talk only if he asks you a direct question, then you can answer. Don't ask anything, don't volunteer any information, just be quiet. So I did. I was quiet. I was literally sitting on the floor in front of him, and he was on his chair, and it felt like, a very kind of surreal teacher, students, meeting the king kind of moment, where you're clearly being put in your place, he's sitting on the floor and he's not. And then he had a ranting. I can only describe it like that. He basically ranted, telling me about Islam, telling me about, Iran, telling me about himself, and the kind of, I would say, not so much agenda, but the role that he had to play within, this great Islamic history in the end days. There's a lot of imagery that was used. It was recalling the stories of Imam Hussein, how he died in Karbala, and how, the Mahdi, because they believe that Imam Mahdi is coming back, that he was a general of the Imam, that he had a role to play in bringing salvation to the world, and that he had a duty to strike the enemy of Islam and the enemies of Iran, and that those enemies, of course, were the Jews. And he talked about how, genocide cannot be called genocide, because when you acting as the weapon of God, then everything that you do is sanctified, and therefore even, the worst of, I would say, violations or crimes, well, you would qualify as a crime against humanity, is actually a religious act, something that is needed and wanted by God, and therefore cannot be evil.
So he rationalized genocide.
Yes, because he was telling me about the evil, the great evil that is Israel, and the great evil. I mean, the seed of evil that every Jew carries within. And he was telling me that, basically they had to go. And he asked me, what do you think about this? And I told him, I said, well, if I understand correctly, and it's a bit confusing, is you talking about genocide on a grand scale. And that's when he explained to me, he actually asked me, do you believe that when people die every day as an act of God, because this is God's will, do you believe God to be a genocidal maniac? He didn't use those terms, but he was asking me, do you believe that it is evil for God to claim life? And, I looked at him and said nothing. And he told me, this is what we do. We are the weapons and instruments that God uses to claim his victory. And so what we do cannot be, qualified as a genocide or an act of evil, because we're doing it in his name. And it's a very interesting notion, if you think about it. This idea that they could justify the worst by saying that because it is God's will, therefore it is a good thing rather than an evil. That life is something that they decide almost. They have this right of life or death over people by virtue of their position, the position that they granted themselves. So yeah, that's exactly how the regime psyche functions. And I don't think that we grasp it. We don't grasp the extent to which they are geared towards the annihilation of not just the Jewish people, but free people in general. because that's what they want to deny us, is the ability to think for ourselves and choose for ourselves, and our ability to be different. They want you to become a slave to their agenda. They want you to serve and disappear yourself. And if you refuse, then you are basically due for annihilation. It's that simple.
Catherine, in the remaining moments that we have with you, you have been exceptionally courageous in writing your story for 2 publications, the National Studies of the Levant, I think I've got that correct or incorrect, and for Lay of the Land. And you're speaking to me today in the media, and there's no doubt that this interview is going to be shared as far and as wide as possible. Do you fear for your safety?
Do you know, I had this conversation myself for a little bit, because initially, when people were asking me if I had met Khamenei, I said no, because I was concerned that if I was to come out, that could be problematic for me, and I didn't want to say too much. I also was concerned about the timing of it all. I just wanted to make sure that whenever I spoke, it was useful, because it's not about me, it's about the information. But I can see it. I've tried for 2-3 years to get people to listen and pay attention. It didn't work, and I was thinking, well, I might as well just tell the whole story, and then maybe people would pay attention. And at the end of the day, I profoundly that only by standing up and actually showing them that it doesn't actually matter what happens, because look, if we don't stand by our values and we don't stand by what we believe, then we don't actually believe in them, really. And I refuse to do this. I refuse to bow to fear. I refuse to give them an inch. I just refuse. I've seen too much, heard too much. I know who they are. I've seen who they are. I just refuse to bow to them out of fear, out of concern. They're coming after us anyway, so we might as well just go out swinging if we have to go out. And again, I choose to live a good life, and I want to live a good life, but at the same time, am I going to run away from a fight? No, because again, I've seen it, and it's not like I chose it. It was kind of given to me. And I think that when you see certain things and you become a witness to horror and terror, running away would be not just a lack of courage. It would be the negation of everything that I would say my family had to go through and survived, what your family had to go through and survived, what so many people, survived. And a lot of the time we complain that during the horror of countless, pogroms and genocides in Jewish history, people did not speak up. Then I had to speak up, because so many did and so many others didn't. I do not want to be added to the list of people who did nothing. It's that simple. So, and I think that it's something that a lot of people can, appreciate and actually understand. It's only when we, there's this saying about how bad things only happen when good people stay silent. And I think that's very true. And so I decided not to be silent.
Catherine Perez Shakdam, Kat, my extraordinary, brave and courageous friend who I am so extremely proud of. To read your story is one thing. To sit down in conversation with you is another thing. I think that the state of Israel, the Jewish world, and the world in general owes you a debt of gratitude for your courage. And I thank you so much for sitting with me on Modiin and Beyond this morning, despite the technical difficulties. And I must be honest, they kind of do raise suspicions. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to sit with us today.
It's my pleasure, Rolene, and I love you. I love you, and thank you so much for your kind.
Love you right back, my friend. Wow. In a world exclusive radio interview, Catherine Perez Shakdam, the Mossad agent who never was. Now, I just want to be clear, Kat was not part of the Mossad. This was entirely private and personal. I think we all owe her an enormous debt of gratitude, and we salute her courage. On the other side of this, Yael Kina.
לשונות רבות בספורט דיברנו, וזה את זה כמעט בכלל שלא הכרנו, ומקומות רבים מאוד עזבנו, ורק מקום אחד רצינו ואהבנו, ומקומות רבים מאוד עזבנו, ואל הארץ, אל הארץ באנו. ונמשכת שיירה מן המאה שעברה, רחוקים כבר היוצאים, ניכרים לחלוצים שעמלו עמדו בפרק בלי לראות את סוף הדרך. ועכשיו אומרים אנחנו לא שקטנו ולא נחנו, לא ימשיכו בלעדינו, זוהי הרפתקת חיינו. מגטאות ומחנות הגחנו, אל הפיצות ואל הישימון הלכנו, מקצות ערב מרוסיה ופולניה, הדלקנו אור גם בדימונה גם בדגניה. מקצות ערב מרוסיה ופולניה, הדלקנו אור גם בדימונה גם בדגניה. ומכל הגלויות ומכל הבעיות, עם נוצר בארץ קמה בשפה אשר נרדמה, שוב התחילה מתעוררת ומדברת ומדברת. מסביב יהום הסער, הקושי והצער, אבל יש על מה לשמוח, יש לו אומץ, יש לו כוח. ישראל צומחת מסביבנו, היא חזקה יותר מכל חסרונותינו, וגם הנגב עוד יהיה פורח, ועוד נדאג שהזקן יהיה שמח, וגם הנגב עוד יהיה פורח, ועוד נדאג שהזקן יהיה שמח. ומכל הגלויות ועם כל הבעיות, מסביב יהום הסער, בקושי והצער, אבל יש על מה לשמוח, יש עוד אומץ, יש עוד כוח, ונמשכת שיירה מן המאה שעברה, רחוקים כבר היוצאים, ניכרים בחלוצים שעמלו עבדו בפרק בלי לראות את סוף הדרך. ועכשיו אומרים אנחנו לא שקטנו ולא נחנו, לא ימשיכו בלעדינו, זוהי הרפתקת חיינו.
Arik Einstein, let me tell you something. Pe'er and I are still trying to recover from that absolute extraordinary interview with Catherine Perez Shakdam in a world exclusive for Radio Modiin. Hey, when we tell you we're going beyond our borders here on Modiin and beyond, we really go beyond our borders. And now, just to bring us the world of entertainment as she does every week, and nobody does it better than her, our wonderful Yael Kina. Yael, let me just tell you something. We've just had an interview. When you hear it back, it's going to floor you. The first interview with the incredible Catherine Perez Shakdam, who shared her story, what it's like to infiltrate the highest echelons of the Iranian regime. But now let's talk about all things entertainment. Nobody does it better than you. And we had a very, very sad loss last week.
We did. I have to say, your previous guest, I haven't heard it yet, but it sounds very much like Apple TV's Tehran. So I'll be eagerly awaiting that scoop. So yes, last week, Sinead O'Connor, the famous Irish singer, died at age 56. She led sort of a semi-controversial, sort of tortured soul life. She was very gifted. And was recognized at an early age for her singing abilities. She'd had an abusive childhood. She had a lot of negative childhood experiences, but went on to be most famous for the song "Nothing Compares to You," which I believe was written by Prince. And that became a hit single, very well known for that. But she didn't sort of take off into regular cookie cutter, media friendly fame. So in her appearance on Saturday Night Live, she tore up the picture of the Pope, which basically caused all hell to break loose and her career to end to some degree. She was married 4 times. She had 4 children. She converted to Islam at a certain point and was just sort of very nonconformist. And last year, sadly, her 17-year-old son died by suicide, and she was not able to recover from that. So she did die last week. Her talent lives on. And as we have said here many times, fame and fortune do not equal happiness.
Now, no foul play is suspected. It could be that she just maybe died of a broken heart.
Yeah, I've noticed in the last few months, there's a little less explicit wording of suicide. I think it seemed the way it was presented was this may have been a choice that she made, but there hasn't been an official statement. There's another actor from Euphoria who died at age 25 yesterday by suicide, but they've kind of just said like tragic death, sudden death. They haven't, I don't know if it's a triggering word. They don't want to give people, imitation ideas. The insinuations seem to be that might be the case for Sinead, as it was for her son, but that isn't confirmed.
Well, we hope, Sinead, you rest in peace and your legacy lives on through your extraordinary voice. I remember hearing her for the first time when she released her first album, The Lion and the Cobra, and I'd never heard a voice like that. It cut through all the noise with its purity. But you and I are also big fans of all things Real Housewives. We celebrate a Real Housewives universe right here on Modiin and beyond. And there be some drama happening in Miami, girl.
Girl, there's always drama happening. It's just a matter of whether it's on or off camera, because we have, the Kyle and Mauricio stuff going on in Beverly Hills while are they filming right now? Aren't they filming right now? And with the Real Housewives of Miami, they're not currently filming. We know at the last season, we sort of saw the demise of the marriage of one Dr. Lenny Hochstein, a very successful plastic surgeon in Miami of Russian Jewish heritage. He was married to Lisa for 13 years. They have 2 young children, I believe, via surrogate. And he was known to not be very faithful and to enjoy the company of women other than his wife, in addition to his wife. So he filed for divorce quite suddenly and basically kicked her out of their $50 million waterfront home. So the divorce is not final, which means he's technically still married. They're working out financial agreements, custody battles, but he has taken upon himself to propose to his newest gorgeous 27-year-old Russian model last week in Ibiza while on holiday, as the sun was setting with a multi-carat ring. And Lisa didn't take long to congratulate him on her Instagram, saying, Mazel tov on the engagement of my current husband and his mistress. So, okay, we'll see. I'm sure it'll continue to unfold on the show. I'm a little perplexed by the need to rush into nuptials yet again. Like, why can't they just date? I don't know why some of these men continue to get married over and over and over again and then have many legal and financial implications after that.
Well, it brings the drama, and you and I are so here for the drama. We love us some Real Housewives drama. But Lenny, you are such a cliche, man.
Oh, the aging doctor hanging on, creating these beautiful women via surgery. And then, yeah, he is a cliche, but the cliches happen for a reason. The stereotypes are based on some repeat behavior. We now have 10 franchises of The Real Housewives. So luckily, something for everyone and something for us to talk about.
Well, I'm here for it all. And I'm also here for Sarah Silverman's embroiled in a legal battle. What's going on there? This is one I missed, which is why I have you.
Well, this actually has to do with the strike, which we've discussed in previous weeks, the writer's strike, the actor's strike, and Sarah Silverman, who's a famous comedian, but also, writer and actress, has sued Meta and OpenAI for copyright infringement, saying, this is part of the argument with the strike is that they're leaning heavily on AI, and the companies have trained their models based on books and her materials, and then are able to create and duplicate sort of, ChatGPT can write a bit based on in Sarah Silverman's voice. And she said, well, I didn't consent to that. And you're using my materials and creating my, trying to capture my voice and then create material that I don't consent to, haven't agreed to. So it's a whole new world. We're figuring this out as a society. ChatGPT was on no one's radar 5 years ago. And it has different implications. So for some of the actors, as I think I mentioned last week, not the main actors, but the extras are being used once, being paid once, their picture is taken, or if there's a picture of a crowd, and then it's regenerated over and over and over again, and no one gets paid except the big bosses continue to make money. So with technology come changes, and some of the changes are requiring us to look at it through a different legal lens, different compensation lens, and see how the art and creative amongst, the talents amongst us, can we be replaced by computers, and how, and who's getting paid for it?
Well, just
so we'll see.
As somebody
Sarah's representing a lot of people.
I'm on her side in this, because as somebody who works as a journalist, who writes for a living, this is a huge infringement on our rights. And basically, things continue the way they are, renders us almost obsolete. And it's a very, very...
Not us, Rolene. Maybe them, not us.
Them, not us. I'm with that. I'm always with you. He's got a big smile on his face behind the scenes. Yael Kinar, our queen. Well, what queens I have been joined by today. I'm still in recovery from my conversation with Catherine Perez Shakdam, the amazing Yael Kinar. A huge thank you to poor abused PR behind the scenes who have to deal with me when we have a technical fall down. A huge thank you to you, PR. And thank you to the listeners. Join me again next week for another edition of Modiin and Beyond right here on Modiin, on Radio Modiin. We're going to play out with some Sinead O'Connor for you. Take care.
Yeah.